Good to see everyone here. It's been, I think, since I was about 15 years old that I've been here. So it took a while, but good to be back. The way that I usually end up doing these things, I would sort of like to know, things that are on your mind, things that you're interested in, and so I always just start by opening up for questions, and then usually after a while I can't stop talking. So it's just that awkward moment of the first question. So if anyone has anything they want to ask, wow, that was great. Thank you. How to get a good sound, yeah.
The first thing I heard was your first note that you have an amazing sound. And I was wondering what's your, complete opinion on it.
Yeah, sound. I mean, sound is the first, as I said, that's the first thing. That's the first thing you hear. I mean, it always seems to me that you can go much, much further with just a nice sound and a good sense of rhythm, and phrasing. That'll already take you a huge amount of the way there, without all the fancy stuff even. So yeah, I mean, sound is something that I've thought a lot about, and I continue to think about. I continue to learn new things about it. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those guys who can explain it too well as far as what I do. For me, it's been a long process of trial and error. Just seeing what works. Making recordings of myself, seeing if it sounds like what I had in mind. Listening to what people, have to say about it. I mean, there was a period maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was checking out. I was seeing if I could find any, students of Joe Allard that I could possibly find, and ask them, well, what did he teach? Because he was, obviously he knew what he was doing, And it was kind of interesting that a lot of people, it seemed like everyone that I spoke to about it, they told him something slightly different, which again, that's like a mark of a real teacher, who knows how to focus in on what that particular person needs and go for that, But there was a kind of a thread that ran through it, which I'm sure you've heard before, that the sound should come from the diaphragm, that's where, this is where the big muscles are. If you're trying to do it all up here, these are not, just a lot harder, and you're working harder, and you're not getting as much out. And I have found that to be true, that the more I really focus on this, I don't really have to do that much with embouchure, it's, it seems to happen by itself. But again, it's after many episodes of trial and error about embouchure and, making sure that the intonation is good and doing harmonics. There's all the basic stuff that people tell you to do. I would say is actually worth doing, And then after that, it gets into another realm too. Because while I was checking all this out, I think I always had an idea of what I wanted to sound like, sort of a vision of what I wanted to express on the horn and what I was doing in music and what, sound I wanted to get. And I think all of those kind of technical things don't really add up to much unless you can focus in on that too, because that gave me something to go towards, So you imagine a sound in your head and you just figure out whatever you need to do to get it out. That's been my experience, having had the chance now to work with a lot of my heroes on every instrument. There's so many different ways that you can approach an instrument, so many different ways you can approach the saxophone, so many ways you can approach any instrument. And the greats on any instrument, I think, some of them are very methodical people. They'll, studies something very, very carefully and thoroughly. Others much more intuitive, you know. But I said that there's a couple things I've noticed that they all have in common. One is this kind of idea of what they want to sound like, just a basic idea of what they're trying to do with music. And then second, and maybe equally or more importantly, is just hours and 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 hours of working on it. You know, or hours and hours of playing experience, you know. There really is no substitute for that. I mean, you can imagine this sound in your head, but if there's one thing I've found is that there's really no shortcut to it. You have to just put in the time. And of course that goes for everything in music. And for me, that's a good way to spend time. I enjoy spending that time, you know. It's kind of a meditation even, you know. It gets me away from, you know, texting land and email land and everything else land, and into something that's actually more important, I think. So, yeah, again, there's my first long-winded answer to a short question. Anybody else? Yeah.
What have you found to be the best way to take all the skills, chords, the patterns, and transfer it into actually something meaningful as a solo?
Yeah.
Bridge that gap.
Right. That's an excellent question. I mean, for many years, I've felt like I had no idea how to practice, and I still feel that way. but I've learned to accept that and go, well, that's what it is. I mean, I think there are many more efficient ways that I probably could have gotten to where I've gotten, but maybe not, because maybe going down all the blind alleys, you know, made me realize, well, that's why it's a blind alley, because, you know, you have to just go down the center and follow everything through. Again, I think the way that I approached music from the very beginning, you know, I started playing the saxophone when I was 10 years old, and started listening a lot right away, you know, to Paul Desmond and Johnny Hodges, you know, and then Charlie Parker, Cannonball Adderley, and, you know, all the greats. And I just spent, you know, hours and hours of time listening to them and trying to copy what they did. And I was fortunately, you know, shown what the way that it all works. That there's a set of chord changes, there's a chorus, you know, it's a tune that they're playing, you know, just the way it functions. So I was aware of that, but I approached it from an ear point of view, I guess, more. Not that it has to be one or the other. I was trying to understand everything on both levels, you know. But it comes from the sound. I mean, music is sound, and jazz especially, you know, this historical thing, you know, this jazz that we are, you know, hearing is, you know, it's really a language. There's certain things that kind of sound right and certain things that don't sound right. There's things that swing and things that don't. And, you know, ways of articulating a note that kind of feel right and ones that don't feel right. And, you know, those are the things that it's very difficult to teach directly. That's the work that you kind of have to do yourself. I mean, you know, it's possible to explain what the notes are and what the chords are, you know, but the feeling behind them and why they work, you know, I think I concentrated on that from the beginning, too. So it wasn't a matter of getting a bunch of knowledge and then figuring out how to apply it later. You know, I was starting from that idea that music can be self-expression from the very beginning. And I was listening, when I was listening to Charlie Parker, I was thinking, wow, that's a really, really high form of self-expression. And how on earth did he come up with that, you know? And of course, one big step to figuring out how we might have come up with that is to be able to figure out what the notes are. Without that, you know, yeah, you're going to have a very hard time understanding. But that's really only one step in it. I mean, the real thing, it always seemed to me, was to understand why he chose those notes and why they work, you know. And that's that's how I always approached it. So again, I think that was a way of bridging that gap, or actually just not having a gap, because that's where I was going with it, you know. So whenever I would listen to Charlie Parker, I would kind of think about it on that level, you know. And of course, you can go back and analyze it later. I mean, I sometimes use the example, you know, the first few bars of confirmation. I mean, probably Berg's tunes. I don't know how much time he spent writing those tunes. Probably not that much. You know, it all sounds like he would play anyway, you know, and he just wrote it down. But I don't exactly know. You know, you just think about why that works. Right? Now, there's if you slow it down, I mean, there's a thing that continues. There's like what's the word I'm looking for? Suspension. It's like a 4 going to 3 that happens and kind of unifies that phrase, you know. First of all, I mean, the basic plan of the group, 1v1, which it probably is, starts the thing by, okay, if you were in doubt, assuming that the he's playing the bass, he's playing the third fifth. So he starts out with that, and it's not on the beat. You know, it's this syncopated thing that makes it not just, you know, too straight ahead, right? And then he goes. Slow it down like that, it's like Brahms. Right? So you're hearing that. It has this symmetry to it, you know. But then you also notice again on the rhythmic side of things, like if it was, you know, it's still good if you landed on A1, you know. But it's better that it's not, and it also mirrors that first phrase, right? Like the way that it started, and then it ends, you know, both off the beat, you know, with everything off the beat. So that's why that works, if you want to explain it. You know? So this is sort of the thing I mean when I'm talking about trying to understand, you know, Charlie Parker from the angle of why does it sound good, you know. And I probably never sat there and, you know, worked all that out exactly like that until a little bit later, but that's kind of the deeper chess game, you know, and that's what allows you the freedom to be able to generate things like that on your own, you know, if you understand it that way. That's the basic answer. There are many other aspects too. I mean, you asked about patterns and things like that. I mean, of course, there are just lots of, you know, things that you have to get under your fingers if you want flexibility, you know. A way that I tend to approach those kind of things is I don't really, I mean, it's just a matter of words. It doesn't really matter, but I usually try and think of them as an idea rather than a pattern, you know. The difference being, if I think of it as an idea, that means, well, that's like some raw material to work with, and not, instead of like, oh, here's something I can plug in here. Because I don't really like that idea, like, okay, I can plug this in here. Even if it's, I mean, of course that's what you do in certain occasions, but if you're thinking, you know, that you can mess with an idea and do anything you want with it, then maybe you'll come up with some more interesting things than just, but you have to get that. I mean, there really isn't any substitute. But it's more fun once you think, well, what can I do with that? I mean, that's about the most basic thing I can think of. Just 1, 2, 3, 5 up into half steps. But what if you just start changing the order? It's basically the same pattern, but all of a sudden it's not as easy to tell what's going on. It's this kind of snaky line, And that's how I tend to approach all those kind of pattern things, And by setting myself up exercises where I have to, this is actually a big one for me. If I'm going to practice something like that, if it's something that I really can't keep in my head, then I'll write it down in one key, but definitely not in all the keys, because I want to force my brain to come up with all the transpositions. That's a big thing for me. It's just being able to play the same thing in different keys. I mean, on other instruments, it's much easier to do, but on saxophone, you really have to think about that. And just working on that has helped me kind of be a little more free, than if I hadn't spent that time. There's also thinking normally if you're going to practice a pattern like that, you're going to do it up and down in half steps. That's the default, But why? It doesn't have to be like that. If you can jump from anywhere to anywhere else, then maybe you'll find more interesting things to say. If you say, okay, I'm going to do it in minor thirds, and let's say instead of let's say that's in minor thirds. So all these simple ideas can generate more interesting things, especially once you just break it up and don't, do the same thing all the time. Use your imagination to go, well, I think that's enough of that, and then I'll slip into something else, So the whole thing about the process that as I've said, that I really don't know how to practice, but that's maybe kind of built into it, is I don't want to be, too efficient in a way. I want to build, some roadblocks into my system to force my brain to work, it's a big subject, really. I hope I've given you at least the basic outlines of, how I think of that issue, because that is a huge thing. I think that's an enormous thing for all of us. How can you go from the things that you can look at on the page and study to making something that actually sounds good and is expressive, and we all have to deal with that. For students who are just learning their music, I would advocate starting simple, simple but deep. If you can get into things, really simple things, and do them well, then you can build on that. Because everything that's complex is just a bunch of simple stuff put together, But if you have a good, sound and a good sense of time, really you could probably spend weeks just figuring out different ways of playing the melody to Out of Nowhere that we just played, Just phrasing a melody, because if it's just... It's fine, but there's so many different things you can say with that, And if you know the song, if you think of it as a song, it's like you came along from Out of Nowhere, this thing, that if you don't think about what it means and what it might mean to you, then you may not be able to access, certain kind of possibilities that are actually, what makes music exciting to all of us. But there's so many different ways just to play the melody. That's kind of slightly cooler in tone. Very different way of playing the same melody. So just practicing the melody, and I think that isn't something we've stressed enough either. It's just being able to play the melody really well. Again, I mean, you know, if you hear Lester Young, I mean, you know, he wasn't always playing a lot of fast things on the horn, but everything was so connected. When you hear it, just, wow, you know, it's like, it's what life's about, you know. So I have to encourage everyone at whatever level, you know, find that whatever level that you're at, you know, and keep thinking of music that way. That's sort of where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Following a little bit on what you just said, expressive devices, sometimes we can tend to overdo them a little bit, like vibrato and speed, and so where do you kind of like draw the line of what is appropriate and what is too
Yeah. Where to draw the line where expressive devices are too much inappropriate? I don't know. I'd say cross the line and then come back. I don't, you know, this is, again, I mean, this is the area that's really interesting. It's, because there isn't anything, I mean, you could do whatever. If that's who you are, if you're just completely over the top and that's how you feel, then that's the kind of music you're going to make, you know. We each have to just kind of use our own taste, though. And that's the magic of it, is that each one of us in here has a different sensibility and a different set of tendencies towards what we like, you know. Some people like, you know, really down the middle, you know, in the groove. Some people maybe want to float a little bit more. You know, it's a very personal thing. That's what it's about, and everyone shouldn't sound the same. Again, I've listened to myself practicing. I record myself, you know. That's sort of the thing that I end up doing too, is I'll set up a, you know, a thing like, okay, I'm going to be thinking about this, even if it has something totally not to do with music, and then let me record what it sounds like when I think about that. And I'll go, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's not it. That just sounds forced. That sounds kind of, you know, not quite true. Let me back off a little bit. Or, yeah, that is totally it, and I should do that more, you know. Again, that's up to individual taste. I mean, there are definitely people who would listen to, you know, Albert Eiler playing Summertime, you know, something like that, and go, wow, now that is just way, 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 way too much. And I think it's beautiful. I mean, I'm glad that we're in a world where we have Albert Eiler and Johnny Hodges and, you know, Charlie Parker and everybody else. Like, we have all these voices. You know, so do your thing. And you can, you know, I mean, the thing about music too is, I mean, whenever you're practicing, whenever you're writing a tune, the worst that can happen is that it sounds bad. You know, it's not like you're a heart surgeon and the patient's going to die. Like, just go ahead and try it, you know. Like, you know, have some fun with it. Yes, what goes through my mind when I'm improvising? That's always a tough thing to answer. I think it's, you know, it's hard to answer because I'm thinking in music, you know. I can go back and explain it in words later, but it always feels like it's a translation, you know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist, you know, but it seems to be that maybe there's a pathway that, you know, when you're thinking in notes, you're not thinking in words. And And that's why it's always so hard to explain what it is you're thinking, you know. But if I did have to try and translate from my note world into my word world, I don't know. I mean, you know, it obviously exists on a lot of levels. I mean, you have to know what the harmony is. You have to know what the song is. You know, you have to have the muscle memory built up to play with a good sound and, you know, have that just kind of be there. I mean, there's so many things that you just really have to practice a ton so you don't have to think about it, so that you can focus on the interesting stuff. You know, so with a tune like Out of Nowhere, I mean, I probably learned that tune when I was 11 or 12, you know, and I've played it a lot of times. So I'm not really focusing that much on just what the harmony is. And it's more like, well, what can, you know, what's the story I want to tell here, you know? So it might be that I'm thinking about maybe, you know, finding a motive or something that I can use for a while, and then figuring out, you know, how to get out of it, too. I mean, it's all about, you know, a story. And the analogy that I sometimes make, I mean, it's like painting a painting, you know, and a great artist is going to look at the canvas and is going to say, okay, well, this is here, but, you know, to balance that out, it really needs some orange up here, it needs some activity, you know, and then that'll be set off with this other thing, which is, you know, maybe not as active, but maybe a cooler color, you know. It's sort of on those lines. And when I'm thinking musically, it's kind of the same thing, but you're using time. You know, you're using sound over a period of time. You know, so, I mean, something that I have worked on, like say over a tune like that, would be to be able to use a motive, you know. Again, this is sort of connects to that idea I was saying about not thinking of things as patterns, but of thinking of them as ideas, you know. So a song like that, I don't know, let's say my motive is... But I was thinking of it, you know, the basic idea fits really well over Jamey 87. Oh, look, there's a little you know, and then when you go to the B flat minor, B flat 7, you know, you can just play it up a half step. But you can also start changing around, you know, if you've already played. Giving it another melodic shape, you know, and then continuing with that kind of thing. I mean, I was expanding intervals. I was thinking, you know, it's just messing around with it as a shape. You know, that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. And then over a longer period of time. You know, because that's kind of still from one phrase to the next. I mean, there's always different levels that these things exist on. Like, you're thinking one note to the next. But in general, you know, I'm thinking of a group of notes. So one phrase to the next, maybe one 8-bar section to the next, one chorus to the next, and then maybe a whole solo, you know. You want everything to have this kind of narrative arc to it, both on a micro level and a bigger level. Again, I mean, you can make it sort of a comparison to another art form, like a writer. I mean, each individual phrase has to have some poetry to it, but then each chapter of the book also has to hang together as a thing, and then the whole book has to hang together, So you get to the point where you're sort of thinking of the whole concert even, thinking of which tunes to call, thinking of how long maybe you'll play on each tune, Although I don't really like to decide that ahead of time. Usually the situation itself tends to dictate that, But yeah, I mean, you can then look at a whole concert as like one big idea like that, and maybe even your whole career or your life. I don't know. I haven't gotten that all anywhere near, but who knows? Maybe that's what Miles was thinking about. I don't know. So those are the things that I find interesting that I'm really thinking about, and the other stuff has to be so second nature that you're not thinking about it anymore. But, I mean, having said that, on the other side, there is this feeling that if I'm consciously thinking about one thing or another, if I'm thinking about my read, if I'm thinking about my sound, if I'm thinking, I mean, of course you react to the sound. I think every musician who works a lot, like you're playing in different rooms, you're playing with different other musicians, the sound system is different, the audience is different, the humidity is different. I mean, there's, you react to that. I think that's a natural thing. So you're always kind of in tune with that on a subconscious or conscious level. But you don't want to think too much, As a matter of fact, there's an art in learning not to think, or not to let, not to, how to say it, like, force things into a direction. That's what I found. And, I mean, the way that I know this is from listening to recordings of myself. And invariably when I kind of have that idea, like, yeah, like if it's, before I've actually started playing, I'll think, oh yeah, now this should be this kind of thing. Invariably it doesn't really work, like forcing it into a thing. Better to kind of react to what's going on and figure it out. Having a lot of experience helps, because you try a bunch of blind alleys, you see what doesn't work, and then you tend to naturally gravitate towards things that might work, But it's that spark of creativity that we're all looking for, that kind of unexpected choice that also fits the tune and is with a nice sound and makes sense, but it's just not what you were expecting. I mean, that's what we all are looking for, and I think that's what all great musicians that I've had a chance to work with. That's when everybody goes, ooh, yeah, now that, like, you got me with that one. That was a surprise, and whatever state of mind you have to get into to be able to generate things like that, And again, I think you can start thinking this way at any level. I don't think it has to be, you don't have to do this over giant steps right away. It can just be like a blues. You can be using 5 notes, and still have that element of surprise. I mean, this is the thing, like when you listen to B.B. King, it's like, it's not harmonically all that much going on, but I mean, the expression, the phrasing, I mean, you can kind of get as deep as you want into any of those aspects. And then all the fancy stuff, the harmonic stuff, the bebop, I mean, it just adds to the palette. It adds to the complexity of the things that you're able to say. I mean, that was another thing that I always realized when I listened to Charlie Parker, because my first thought, when I was 12, was, why is he playing so many notes? Honestly, it was like, Johnny Hodges didn't play so many notes. It's like I don't know, sort of an odd thought for an 11-year-old to be having, I guess. But after a while, I realized, oh yeah, those notes are all needed to paint that picture, to show that, vision of reality. He actually did need all those notes, so that's what I've tried to find in myself. Of course, then the notes once Coltrane came sheets of sound, the number of notes keeps getting higher and higher sometimes, and I'm guilty of it. Sometimes myself, I'll get ahead of myself. But sometimes you need all that fancy stuff, and a lot of times you don't. And it just takes some wisdom and experience to know when.
Yeah. When you first started, what did you find helped you the best?
When I first started to improvise, what helped me the best? I don't know. I've sort of been through it, like listening a lot. Listening and trying to copy. This isn't something I would necessarily recommend to everyone, but I really didn't transcribe that many solos, like write down a solo. I don't know if I ever did that, actually. I would listen over and over again to where I could play it. But more often than not, I was just like listening for one specific section that I couldn't figure out what it was, What I did a ton was play along, like put the record to Scrabble from the Apple on and play along with Bird and try and imagine being the one thinking of those ideas and putting myself in that place, That sounds kind of abstract, and you have to have a certain level of knowledge to be able to get there. You have to know what the changes are, but I found that really helpful, I think everyone's different though too. I think whatever you can find that keeps you interested and makes it fun, do that and do it a lot. That's kind of all it is. It's just putting in the time, And I wouldn't have put in the time except I enjoyed it. It was really fun. And I approached it like it was play. There's a reason they call it playing music, It can be like that. It can also be incredibly frustrating, and I know about that too, because when it's not, when I have an idea of what I want to do and I just can't figure out how to do it, nothing drives me so nuts. If it wasn't for neighbors and people sleeping, I would just work all night, until I just couldn't stay awake anymore trying to figure something out, It's probably better to take a break, usually anyway, but it can be very, very frustrating, but those moments when you do break through and you realize, that's what I was looking for, it's so good, that's sort of how I approached it, and that's what I advise everyone to do again. It's just, whatever works for you, whatever helps you get there, do that, and just keep your mind open, and your ears open, and see if you can make something beautiful at whatever level you're at. Yeah.
There was this video I watched, I probably watched this like 100 times, but you were playing tuba, right? And there was this part where you were only playing overtones and you were getting such crazy patterns. How did you manage your overtones?
Overtones, yeah, I'm not sure what I was doing. I think I know the video you're talking about, but I don't know. I don't think I ever watched it, so. But that's a big part of the sound thing too, to working on the overtones, just to get a strong sound. And then you can manipulate it in different ways. Obviously, thinking of melodies a fifth above what you're fingering, same as a brass instrument, like kind of approach it in that way. And then of course, if you mix them up and get into the, mixing up the normal fingerings with the false fingerings, that's an area that's also been explored very well. But something that I've tried to develop. Something I heard Sonny Rollins do. He'll do that from time to time, and I've tried to kind of build on that, make it a little more flexible. But that's one of the things I'm working on. And then mixing up false fingers with that. There's different things. There's all kinds of weird things you can do with saxophone. I'm sure getting into it. All sorts of strange sounds you can make. Listening to other kinds of music has kind of helped me think that way too. I mean, like maybe I'll be thinking of a Shania or something, what's another name for it? Zerna. I think it's kind of the same thing. Like the oboe, the Middle Eastern or Indian kind of oboe thing. There's some amazing music that's been made that way, and I'll sometimes think, well, how can I kind of imitate that sound? And that's maybe one of the thoughts. I'm not exactly sure if that's kind of what I was doing in part of the video, but, if you play the tune, if you're playing and it's like a fifth higher, then you just have to transpose the tune and play normally. But it's hard to keep your embouchure so it works. But again, if you spend a lot of time just playing long tones like everybody says you should, it does help. And just make up exercises for yourself using that too. And even, just kind of using the low B flat, low C, and low D, or just these few notes. You can use harmonics to play all kinds of melodies with that. Again, just hours and hours of doing that. I could definitely stand to spend a few more hours of doing that. I wonder what that would feel like if I just did that for a few hours. I don't know, I might have an aneurysm or something. Yeah.
How important do you think setup is? The horn, the mouthpiece, the reed, and also what is yours?
Setup. All right. Hack-based. This is an old Mark 6. This is like a 96,000, I think. And this is an old link. It's, I think it's between a 7-star and an 8, something like that. And the reeds are, this is a Rico Jazz Select. Oh, no, it's not Rico anymore, right? It's D'Addario, excuse me. But it's still called Jazz Select, right? Jazz Select 3 soft unfiled. So basically a 7-star-ish with a 3. So it's pretty down the middle. I don't remember exactly what I used to use, but I remember like in the 90s, I think I was using a much more resistant setup, 9 or a 10 with a number 4 reed. And I have no idea how I did that, But I did change a lot. I kind of changed the whole concept. And this was around the time, too, that I was trying to get into, like, what did Joe Alex say? Like I found that I was able to get more expression if I didn't play so hard a setup. I could just be more precise. But it's really hard, in a certain way, it's harder to go down and learn how to blow less hard than it is to just put a harder reed and just barrel through. Because you have to be a little more subtle. And I've sort of found a thing now. Now it's beginning to feel kind of comfortable, but where I feel like I am actually using a lot of physical force, but it's not at a spot where it's going to overblow the sound all the time, And that's a real trick. I remember going to, whenever I had the chance, I used to go hear Joe Henderson play. And we have these recordings now, you hear, just this beautiful, round, huge sound, And he was playing, I don't know exactly what it was, but I think it was like a Summer Sea Star with like a 2.5 range or something like that. And he was very quiet. He was actually very soft. And when you hear it on records, it's big and full, but it was, and he was a tiny guy. He was like very thin, short guy, like a gnome, and his music would just come out of him, and he had all these levels of expression, but I realized that it was within this very narrow window, because the setup he was using, was so soft. So to have like a great degree of control within a soft setup, I found, is, at the end of the day, offers me more kind of possibilities. And, this isn't that soft. It's like a 7-star with a 3. It's kind of normal. Because I do find that I like to dig in and be fairly physical, and especially when it gets down to Samoa and stuff like that. There's a certain level of resistance that I need. You asked how important this setup is, and I think it is important. Not as important as some other things. Not as important as music. Like learning the skills of music is much more important. But if you're not comfortable, then you're not going to be able to find your potential. I mean, now, there's a lot of different setups that I could play, and I probably wouldn't feel that comfortable, but after a few minutes, I'd probably basically sound like me, But it comes from spending time on one setup and you find your things, and you just learn how to play the horn. So just find something that, that feels like it's comfortable and feels like you can express yourself, at least some of the time. I say, just find something you're comfortable on. Well, what if you're never comfortable? I know that feeling. But yeah, I'd say concentrate more on the how to play the horn, and then you'll realize. I mean, for me, using a bunch of different setups, now I'll sometimes throw something on just to kind of check it out, because every little variable that you do changes a little thing, it's kind of interesting. Whenever I put some other kind of mouthpiece on, I feel like I learn a little bit of something about the saxophone that I didn't know before, about how, this parameter changes this thing. It's hard to explain, but for me, I've always ended up coming back to links, just because I can get a lot of different sounds out of them. And they're not the friendliest mouthpieces, not always easy to find a reed, it can sometimes feel stuffy, like you do have to play them really correctly or they don't really work, I think. But once you do that, then, everything else that I've tried, I've eventually felt annoyed by. And with links, I feel like, usually the annoying thing is me. It's not the mouthpiece's fault, it's just me, So me, I can work on.
Chris, I have a question. Yeah. Can you talk about two things? Yeah. Since there are a lot of young people in the room, when did you start playing professionally? When do you think it is important for a young person to go out and start playing music in front of people? And my second part of the question is this: faithfulness to the music itself. I heard you at the University of Illinois with Dee and those guys, and Aebersold, and it was a really great concert. But the thing that I really recognized from you, Aebersold was doing his thing, and he was in his thing, but Dee singing something else, and you could do all the tricks, but you chose not to do them, and you just chose to be faithful to the groove of what the band was doing. So can you, and that's a lot of questions.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, my experience was very unusual. As I was saying, I started playing when I was 10, and I think I had my first actual paid job, not much of a job, but like at some kind of a club, a women's club or something like that, at the end of that year. So I think I played my first, I think I got, maybe $15. It's great. By the time I was in high school, I was playing pretty regularly. I started playing in middle school. Gigs around Columbia, South Carolina, is where I'm from. And I was really fortunate. I was playing, I think most of my time through high school, every Tuesday night, there was a trumpet player, Johnny Helms, was just way into Clifford Brown. And, he didn't want to hear anything past 1959, maybe, 58, I don't know. And we played that way. It was amazing, it's great. And then Wednesday night, Jamey, who's the guitar player, was a little more forward thinking, So we do those standards, but we'd also play free, and then we'd do a Rolling Stones tune or something, just, something completely different. So I kind of got, a lot of experience. I mean, this was every week, and then I was working, on the weekends. I was in a wedding band, I had the tuxedo, I had the DX7 keyboard, and just playing some keyboard, things like that, doing whatever gigs came along. And that was fantastic. I mean, if a young musician can get into that situation, yeah, do it. And I was also very fortunate to have, a family. I mean, my folks were totally supportive and saw that, I just really loved it. So, things haven't gotten any easier since then in the music industry, and live music, is a little not always easy to find. It's a very unfortunate thing. It felt like it was hard to find then. I think it might be even worse now. It depends on where you are too. I think different towns, it really depends on the situation. But I was, I feel very, very lucky that I had that experience of being able to play in front of people from an early age, because that is a different thing than practicing by yourself, or even practicing with a rhythm section with a band. Which I'd say is a huge, huge, huge thing. It's learning to play with other musicians. Jazz music, that's what it's about, And it's been an amazing thing, Jamey's got all these records. We can practice without needing to call a whole rehearsal or find, it's an amazing resource. It still is no substitute for, getting together with musicians and figuring out how to listen to each other and how to play, which you can only learn from doing it. And whatever situation you can get in where you're a little bit over your head, just go for it, I'd say, Like you tend to learn the most when you're playing with people who are a little bit better than you. Whenever you can find those folks, seek them out. This is something I noticed when I moved to New York. It was such a breath of fresh air. I moved up right after I graduated high school, so that was the first time, because there was nobody my age interested in jazz at that time in Columbia that I knew. So I never had that experience of playing with people my age until I went to New York, Then I was at the new school, and, Brad Meldau was in the same class, and Larry Goldings and Pete Bernstein. All of a sudden there were all these great musicians my age that we would hang out and play. And we would listen to music together. That social thing of, hanging out and listening to music together, appreciating different things, it's amazing. And there's no substitute for it. That's kind of the environment that you have here. That's kind of what is needed. And that's where the music originally comes from too. It comes from people hanging out and talking and trying different things and playing. So whatever situations you can find like that, just dive in, I would say. The second half of that, trying to play for the music. Again, the great thing about music is that it's a reflection of people's personalities, and that's what you see, And Ambrose, as you mentioned, that's his personality. He's going to do that. What he's working on, he's going to do, and I admire him for that. I was like, yeah, totally. And we definitely had, as you can imagine, we had a fair amount of conversations this way and that. It wasn't never out of any disrespect or anything. It's just, well, I'm working on this, so that's what I'm going to do. Me, I just have a different personality and a different set of experiences, you know, where I heard, well, you know, it just didn't feel right for me to play that way in that setting, like in a real straight ahead setting. To do something else, it just would be, it's just not what I'm hearing, you know. So you go with what you hear. And again, your experiences can kind of help you with that. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
When did you begin and how do you approach that?
Dublin, like on other saxophones, on clarinet. You know, I started playing the clarinet when I was in high school. I was already working, so I wanted to play a different instrument in the high school band, you know, so I started playing the clarinet. I never really got around to the flute. I'm kind of working my way around to it now, I feel like. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I never reached the level that I wished I could have reached because I'm too scattered doing other things. Yeah, it's just like anything else. I never had the feeling that one instrument was going to interfere with how I played another instrument, except for the time spent, you know. But now, I mean, you know, if I spend a few hours practicing the bass clarinet, it's also going to help my tenor playing. So it is all connected, but they each need some time. They just, you know, and you have to figure out how best to use that time. As far as like a period when to start doubling or not, I don't know that there is. I think if you enjoy it and if it's something that, you know, there's a situation where you need, you know, like there's a big band part and you double on it, well, you know, then that's a good reason to start doing it. Yeah, no, I can't really say that's my field of expertise. It's a little outside my realm. So, yeah. Do you have a question?
So, you're playing the song, the scales and stuff. Is it wrong when you're in the room and you don't have music? Just kind of like the sound back you, not really thinking about it?
Saying like.
Like it's kind of wrong.
Yeah. Well, so you're asking if it's wrong to kind of just go by ear instead of the theory. Yeah, well, you know, something that really helped me, and I mentioned that I used to play every Tuesday night, you know, with these guys. A lot of the tunes, I wouldn't know the tune, you know, and if I wanted to solo, and I was young and raring to go, I was like, yeah, I really want to play, you know, so I wasn't just going to sit it out, you know. So I wanted to figure it out. So it wasn't a matter of like going by ear and forgetting the theory. It was more like, oh, can I hear what's going on? You know, and can I figure it out so that, you know, so if I had to write it down, I could write it down. But just using my ear. I think that's definitely something to work on, or not to work on, but to just do, you know. And again, that can be in the context of playing along with records too, like a song that you don't really know. Well, if you play along, can you hear what's going on? Can you hear what the bass player is doing enough to, okay, that's where it's going. This is where the chorus ends. There's a, you know, the form is 8 bars, 4 bars, 8 bars, you know, whatever you need to do. I think that's invaluable. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we're all doing when we're improvising. You know, not thinking. I mean, I'm not sure what I'm thinking when I'm improvising, but I'm definitely not seeing a set of chords go by like D major 7, D major 7. You know, it's not like that. And I actually don't. I mean, this is maybe another area, but I don't even like to think of music that way at this point. I mean, of course, that's a way of communicating things, and that's what written music is about. It's about, or any kind of writing. You know, it's a way of communicating things in a shorter way than it would be if you had to just teach it to somebody, you know. But, you know, like that song, Out of Nowhere, you know. if you look at it, you know, it's like. It's a set of chords, but I don't really like to approach it that way when I'm making music over it. I want to think of the connections. I want to hear lines, you know. So, you know, how do you do that? Like you think about the voice leading it, and you think about melodies, internal melodies, you know. You hear things as a set of lines rather than just, you know, blop, 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 you know. And again, to communicate it, if you need that blop, blop, blop. But when I'm actually playing, I want to think of it as a flowing river, really, you know. So instead of, you know, I don't know, this is kind of free form, but the way that I would approach those changes, you know. And I'm being kind of free with it. I'm not even always playing exactly the original changes. I'm reharmonizing it as I go, just kind of using my ear. And I don't quite have enough chops on the piano or a fast enough mind, you know, to come up with all that I'm thinking about. But this is what I do on the horn. That's the same way that I try and do changes on the horn. Thinking of them. Yeah. Yeah, sure. You know, where I'm like thinking of lines that, you know, I can answer myself, I can set up, you know, voice leading things, meaning that, you know, maybe I'm hearing that it's gonna go, you know, that the low voice is gonna go down and the high voice is gonna go up, something like that. I mean, it's a little bit far afield, you know, because that isn't exactly by ear, because I do know the tune. But I'm always trying to, you know, okay, you have to organize your thoughts, you have to understand what the harmony is, and then think of it very freely, you know, I think, to really make some music out of it. Jamey was saying, I think it's a good idea. Like, maybe I'll play one more tune. And so wrap it up. I think it's not the end of a tune. It's the hardest part. You know, Thank you.